On August 1st, 2008, General Mohammed Suleiman was shot dead on the balcony of his beach chalet in Tartus. The Syrian government called it an assassination. Israel said nothing. But the real story isn't the kill. It's what happened during the 72 hours before the trigger was pulled, when the operation came within minutes of total collapse, and the shooters had to decide whether to abort or stay buried while their cover disintegrated around them. Mohammed Suleiman didn't appear in newspapers. He didn't give interviews. His official title was Deputy Chief of Presidential Security, but that was bureaucratic camouflage. Suleiman's actual job was managing Syria's most sensitive operations. He coordinated weapons shipments from Iran to Hezbollah. He oversaw payments to Palestinian militant groups. And most critically, he supervised the construction of a secret nuclear reactor at Al-Kabar in eastern Syria, a facility Israeli jets destroyed in September 2007. After that airstrike, Syria stayed silent. No protests, no condemnations. Assad gave no public statement. Western intelligence agencies interpreted the silence as embarrassment. Israeli intelligence saw it differently. They saw preparation. Within 3 months, Mossad's signals unit confirmed Suleiman was meeting with North Korean and Iranian nuclear engineers. The meetings happened in Damascus, but Suleiman spent his weekends at a private chalet in Tartus, a coastal city on the Mediterranean that housed both a Russian naval base and Syria's naval intelligence headquarters. Tartus wasn't just unfriendly terrain, it was a surveillance dead zone. Israeli assets couldn't operate there. Drones were too visible. Satellite coverage was intermittent. By June 2008, Israel's defense establishment made a calculation. Suleiman needed to be eliminated before Syria's nuclear program could restart. But the only window they had was Tartus, the worst possible location for the operation. On July 10th, Mossad's director sat down with the commander of Flotilla 13, the Israeli Navy's elite special operations unit. The mission was approved within 72 hours. The plan was direct. Insert a sniper team by sea. Position them on the beach near Suleiman's chalet. Wait for a shot. Extract under darkness. But there was a structural problem no one addressed during planning. How long could 2 men stay hidden on an active public beach in a city crawling with Syrian military intelligence? The answer to that question would nearly destroy the operation. The lead shooter assigned to Tartus was a Flotilla 13 operator named Eitan. That's not his real name, but it's what intelligence sources called him in later debriefs. Eitan was 34. He'd been part of 4 prior Mossad operations, including a 2003 assassination in Beirut. He'd trained with the IDF's sniper school and held an instructor certification. He was also the first person to challenge the operational plan. During the mission briefing in Tel Aviv, Eitan asked how long the team would be exposed on the beach. The answer was vague. As long as necessary. He asked what would happen if Syrian naval patrols increased. The answer was worse. We'll adapt in real time. He asked if Mossad had confirmation that Suleiman would actually be at the chalet during the mission window. The answer, high probability based on pattern analysis. Eitan told his commanding officer the plan felt incomplete. He didn't refuse the mission, but he made it clear he thought they were being inserted without adequate contingency protocols. His commanding officer's response was brief. You're not being asked to design the operation. You're being asked to execute it. Eitan accepted. But everything he worried about during that briefing would prove correct in ways no one anticipated. On the night of July 28, 2008, Eitan and a second sniper call sign, Yoav, were dropped by submarine 12 kilometers off the coast of Tartus. They swam for 4 hours using closed-circuit rebreathers. Each man carried a waterproof kit with a disassembled M24 sniper rifle, suppressed Glock 19, GPS unit, Syrian currency, and fake Lebanese identification. They reached the beach at 3:47 a.m., but they couldn't land. A group of men were sitting around a bonfire 200 meters south of their target zone. Eitan and Yoav stayed in the water for 23 minutes, waiting. At 4:10 a.m., the group left. The snipers crawled onto the sand, buried their dive gear under rocks, and moved inland toward Suleiman's chalet, a 3-story building with a large balcony facing the sea, approximately 180 meters from the waterline. The plan called for them to hide in a grove of palm trees on the northern edge of the beach. It offered partial cover and a direct line of sight to the balcony, but when they reached the grove at 5:20 a.m., the position was compromised. A municipal cleaning crew had arrived with portable lights and was raking the sand beneath the trees. Eitan radioed the offshore support team. Primary position compromised. Cleaning crew on site. Need alternate. After 90 seconds, the response came back. Hold position. Assess alternate locations. Eitan scanned the beach. There were no alternate positions with both concealment and a clear sight line. The beach was open. The nearest buildings were 400 meters away, too far for a reliable shot. He made a decision that violated the operational plan. He and Yoav would stay on the beach in plain sight, pose as morning joggers and wait for the crew to finish. They changed into civilian athletic gear. They jogged slowly along the water. They stretched. At 6:15 a.m., the crew left. Eitan and Yoav moved into the palm grove. They assembled their rifles. They dug shallow pits and buried themselves under dried palm fronds and beach debris. By 7:00 a.m., they were in position. The sun was rising. Suleiman's chalet was visible. Then Eitan's radio crackled with a message that threatened the entire operation. Target not confirmed on site. Surveillance indicates chalet may be empty. Mohammed Suleiman wasn't at the chalet. Mossad's surveillance team, operating from a fishing trawler 8 kilometers offshore, had been tracking cellular signals and thermal imaging from the building. The data showed no one had entered or exited the property since July 26, 2 days before the insertion. Eitan had 2 options: abort immediately and extract, or hold position and wait for confirmation that Suleiman would arrive. He asked how long the wait might be. The answer came back unknown. He asked if the mission window was still valid. The answer, yes, but narrowing. Eitan chose to hold, but that decision introduced a cascading problem no one had planned for. Every hour the snipers remained on that beach, the probability of detection increased exponentially. Tartus wasn't a tourist destination. It was a military city. Syrian naval intelligence maintained constant patrols. Russian naval personnel cycled through the port. Local police conducted irregular sweeps of public areas. Eitan and Yoav's cover story, Lebanese tourists visiting the coast, was paper-thin. Under any sustained questioning, it would disintegrate immediately. For 36 hours, they stayed buried in the sand. During daylight, they couldn't move. At night, they emerged briefly to stretch, hydrate, and adjust position. They ate energy bars, they urinated into bottles, they slept in 90-minute rotations. The beach wasn't empty. Families arrived each morning. Children played within 30 meters of their position. Teenagers set up volleyball nets. Dogs ran past their hiding spot. On July 30th at 9 a.m., a Syrian police officer walked directly past Eitan's position. He stopped 15 meters away. He lit a cigarette and stood facing the water for 4 minutes. Eitan had his hand on the suppressed Glock. He calculated the sequence in his head. 1 suppressed shot to the officer. Drag the body into the water. Abort mission. Swim for extraction. The officer finished his cigarette and walked away. That afternoon, Eitan sent a message to the support team. Exposure risk increasing. Recommend abort if target not confirmed within 24 hours. The response took 3 minutes. Stand by. Cellular intercept indicates target en route. At 11:30 p.m. on July 31st, his surveillance confirmed Mohammed Suleiman had arrived at the chalet with 2 bodyguards. They entered through the rear entrance. Eitan was told to prepare for a morning shot. The operational assumption was straightforward. Suleiman would step onto the balcony for breakfast, as he'd done during prior surveillance windows. But at 2:15 a.m., while Yoav was sleeping, Eitan received a second message that changed everything. Secondary surveillance indicates target aware of security threat. Movement patterns altered. Balcony exposure unlikely. Eitan read the message twice. Then he woke Yoav and showed him the screen. Yoav's response was immediate. If he's not coming outside, we're sitting here for nothing. Eitan didn't respond. He was calculating something else. If Suleiman knew there was a security threat, that meant Syrian intelligence might already be aware of Israeli interest in Tartus, which meant the beach could be under counter-surveillance, which meant staying in position might not just be pointless, it might be suicidal. He radioed the support team. Need clarification on threat awareness. Does target know about this operation specifically or general elevated risk? The answer came back after 5 minutes. Unknown. Signals. Intelligence ambiguous. Recommend maintain position pending further assessment. Eitan looked at Yoav. The calculation was now fundamentally different. They weren't just waiting for a shot that might not come. They were waiting while potentially already compromised. Yoav said what Eitan was thinking. We should extract now. Eitan didn't disagree, but he also knew what an abort would mean. Suleiman would vanish. The intelligence window would close. Syria's nuclear program would continue rebuilding without Israeli visibility into who was running it. The mission had been authorized at the highest levels of Israeli Defense Command. An abort, without attempting the kill, would be seen as operational failure, but staying carried a cost that was only now becoming visible. If they were detected, the exposure wouldn't just burn 2 operators. It would confirm to Syria and Hezbollah that Israel was running active missions inside Tartus, a revelation that could compromise every other intelligence asset in the region. Eitan sent another message. Request abort authority pending target confirmation of balcony exposure by 0800 August 1st. The response was immediate. Abort authority denied. Mission proceeds as planned. Yoav looked at Eitan. So we're staying. Eitan nodded. But the certainty that had carried him through the insertion was gone. At 6 a.m. on August 1st, Eitan and Yoav were in position with rifles assembled. Wind conditions were favorable. Visibility was clear. The chalet remained dark. No movement on the balcony. No lights inside. At 7 a.m., one of Suleiman's bodyguards stepped outside and smoked on the side patio. He didn't go near the balcony. At 8:30 a.m., a delivery truck arrived with groceries. The driver unloaded bags at the rear entrance and left. At 10 a.m., Eitan received confirmation. Target inside. No external movement. Hold position. By noon, the beach was filling with families. Children were digging in the sand 50 meters from Eitan's position. A group of teenagers set up a volleyball net 30 meters south. Eitan sent a message. If target doesn't present by 1400 hours, position becomes untenable. No response came back. At 1:15 p.m., the chalet's front door opened. One bodyguard walked to a car in the driveway, retrieved a briefcase, and went back inside. At 1:40 p.m., a Syrian naval patrol boat slowed 200 meters offshore. It circled once, then continued north. Eitan radioed again. Naval activity increasing. Shot window closing. The response: maintain position. Target expected to move to balcony before evening. By 5:00 p.m., the beach began emptying. By 6:00 p.m., the area was nearly deserted. At 7:12 p.m., Mohammed Suleiman stepped onto the balcony. He was wearing a white shirt and dark trousers. He was holding a phone to his ear. He stood near the railing, facing the sea. Eitan had a clear shot. Range 182 meters. Wind negligible. Visibility excellent. But a jogger was running along the waterline, moving from south to north. If Eitan fired, the jogger would be within 40 meters when the suppressed rifle discharged. Even muted, the sound would be audible. Eitan held fire. The jogger passed. Suleiman ended his call and leaned against the railing. Eitan adjusted his breathing. He placed the crosshairs on Suleiman's upper chest. Then Suleiman turned and walked back inside. The balcony was empty. Yoav's voice came through the radio earpiece. He'll come back. But Eitan heard something in Yoav's tone that mirrored his own doubt. What if he doesn't? At 7:45 p.m., Eitan's radio came alive with a message that turned waiting into pressure. Mission window closes at 2100. Extract or execute. The operational plan had always assumed a morning shot with evening extraction as backup. But that plan had depended on Suleiman presenting a clear target with enough time for the snipers to reach the water and swim to the pickup point. If Suleiman didn't return to the balcony within the next 75 minutes, the mission would abort. 3 days of exposure. 3 days buried in sand on a hostile beach. For nothing. At 8:10 p.m., the chalet's interior lights turned on. Shadows moved behind the curtains on the second floor. Eitan watched through his scope. Someone was moving from room to room. He couldn't identify who. At 8:30 p.m., one of the bodyguards stepped onto the balcony. He lit a cigarette. He stood near the railing for 2 minutes, looking out at the water. Then he went back inside. Eitan's pulse had elevated during those 2 minutes. His finger had moved to the trigger guard. For a moment, He'd considered whether eliminating the bodyguard would draw Suleiman outside, but that wasn't the mission, and it would have guaranteed failure. At 8:42 p.m., ITAN sent a message to the support team. 18 minutes remaining. Target has not presented. Request extraction authorization. The response came back immediately. Hold position. Execute if window presents. Yoav shifted slightly in his sandpit. His voice came through the earpiece, barely audible. We're not getting this shot. ITAN didn't respond. He kept his eye pressed to the scope, watching the empty balcony. At 8:47 p.m., Mohammed Suleiman stepped outside. He was carrying a glass of tea. He set it on a small table near the railing. He stood with his back to the sea, facing into the chalet's interior. ITAN had a shot, but only to Suleiman's back. The angle was poor. A back shot carried higher risk of non-fatal wounding. A wounded target would mean Syrian intelligence would lock down the entire coast within minutes. Extraction would become exponentially more dangerous. ITAN held fire, waiting for him to turn. Suleiman remained facing inward. He picked up the glass and drank. He set it back down. He said something to someone inside the chalet, though ITAN couldn't hear the words. The time was 8:51 p.m., 9 minutes until mission abort. ITAN made a calculation. If Suleiman didn't turn within 30 seconds, he would take the back shot. A back shot was better than no shot. 15 seconds passed. Suleiman remained facing inward. 20 seconds. He picked up the glass again. 25 seconds. He drank. At 8:52 p.m., Suleiman turned to face the sea. He set the glass down on the table. He placed both hands on the railing and looked out at the water. ITAN adjusted the crosshairs. Center mass. Upper thoracic region. He controlled his breathing. Exhale half. Hold. Squeeze. Then a car door slammed somewhere behind the chalet. Suleiman's head turned sharply toward the sound. He stepped back from the railing. His body angled toward the chalet's interior door. ITAN kept the crosshairs on him, but Suleiman was moving. Not fast, but no longer stationary. The shot was degrading. Another voice called from inside the chalet. A woman's voice. Suleiman responded. He took another step back from the railing. ITAN's window was collapsing. In 3 more seconds, Suleiman would be inside the doorframe, partially obscured. In 5 seconds, he'd be gone. ITAN applied pressure to the trigger. The M24 discharged at 8:52:17 p.m. The suppressor reduced the sound to a muted crack, absorbed mostly by the ambient noise of distant traffic and surf. The 7.62mm round traveled 182 meters in 0.22 seconds. Suleiman had started to turn his head back toward the interior when the round struck him just below the left collarbone. The impact drove him backward. His hands released the railing. His body twisted and collapsed against the balcony door. ITAN didn't wait for confirmation. He pulled back from the scope. His hands moved automatically, breaking down the M24 and shoving the components into his pack. Yoav was already moving. They buried the rifle parts in the sand where they'd been lying. They would not take the weapons into the water. Too much weight. Too much risk if intercepted. They pulled off the camouflage netting and sprinted toward the waterline. ITAN's legs were stiff from 3 days of immobility. He stumbled once in the sand but caught himself. They hit the water at 8:54 p.m. Behind them, someone screamed from inside the chalet. Lights came on in the upper windows. A door slammed. ITAN and Yoav swam hard, northwest, using the GPS units strapped to their wrists. The water was warmer than it had been during insertion. The current was pushing them slightly south. ITAN adjusted his angle. At 9:02 p.m., they were 400 meters offshore. ITAN looked back once. The chalet was fully lit now. People were moving on the balcony. A vehicle had pulled up in front of the building. At 9:10 p.m., they were 800 meters out. ITAN's shoulders were burning. He'd been lying motionless for 72 hours, and now his body was demanding oxygen. His lungs couldn't provide fast enough. At 9:18 p.m., he saw the support vessel. A fishing trawler, lights off, holding position 1,200 meters offshore. At 9:22 p.m., hands reached down and pulled him onto the deck. Yoav came up behind him. Someone handed ITAN a towel, someone else handed him water. He drank without tasting it. The trawler's engine started. They turned west, away from the Syrian coast. At 9:30 p.m., Syrian police vehicles arrived at the beach. Flashlights swept across the sand. Officers moved toward the palm grove where Eitan and Yoav had been positioned 36 minutes earlier. At 10:15 p.m., Syrian naval vessels began active patrols along the coast. 2 patrol boats moved in a search pattern, sweeping east to west. But by then, Eitan and Yoav were in international waters. Eitan sat on the deck with a blanket around his shoulders. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline depletion. Yoav sat across from him, silent. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say yet. They didn't know if Suleiman was dead. They didn't know if the shot had been fatal or if Syrian doctors were working to save him. They didn't know if the operation had succeeded or if they'd just triggered a regional crisis for nothing. The support team received confirmation at 10:47 p.m. Mohammed Suleiman had been pronounced dead at 9:05 p.m. Single gunshot wound to the upper chest. Massive internal hemorrhaging. The mission was complete. The delay was intentional. If Syria chose to retaliate, Israel wanted plausible deniability intact. Syria didn't retaliate, but the absence of retaliation wasn't restraint. It was recalculation. Within 6 weeks of Suleiman's death, Syrian military intelligence arrested 14 Lebanese nationals suspected of providing surveillance support to Israel. 3 were executed without trial. The remainder disappeared into Syrian prisons. The arrests weren't random. Syrian intelligence had been tracking communication patterns between Beirut and Tartus for months. Suleiman's assassination gave them justification to act on intelligence they'd been holding. 2 of the executed men had been Mossad informants for over a decade. Their networks collapsed immediately. Israel lost operational visibility into Syrian weapons transfers to Hezbollah for the next 18 months. The cost had been ceded the moment Eitan pulled the trigger. Eliminating Suleiman required exposing methods, and exposed methods always burn assets. Hezbollah drew its own conclusions. Within 3 months, the organization's leadership implemented new security protocols. High-value commanders stopped maintaining fixed residences. Movement patterns became randomized. Communication shifted to couriers and dead drops. The message Hezbollah took from Tartus wasn't that Mossad had eliminated one coordinator. It was that Mossad could strike inside Syrian territory at will. That perception shift accelerated changes that made future operations exponentially harder. Iran responded differently. Rather than withdrawing, it deepened its presence in Syria. The logic was straightforward. Suleiman's death proved that intermediaries were vulnerable. Direct Iranian involvement would be harder to target. By late 2008, Iranian Revolutionary Guard officers were embedded inside Syrian military facilities. Engineers who had previously visited Damascus on temporary assignments became permanent residents. The nuclear coordination that Suleiman had managed didn't stop. It simply moved behind layers of Iranian state protection. Eitan learned these details during his debriefing in Tel Aviv. The sessions lasted 4 days. On the 3rd day, a Mossad analyst walked him through the operational aftermath. The analyst explained that Syrian naval intelligence had recovered the buried rifle components from the beach. Ballistic analysis confirmed Israeli manufacture. That confirmation hadn't been public, but it circulated through intelligence channels in Damascus, Tehran, and Beirut. Eitan asked if the mission had been worth it. The analyst paused before answering. We eliminated 1 man. We didn't eliminate the program. Eitan was not assigned to another operation inside Syria. Mohammed Suleiman's death didn't end Syria's interest in nuclear capability. It removed the man who knew how to rebuild it quietly, but it didn't remove the intent. By 2010, IAEA inspectors found traces of undeclared nuclear material at 3 Syrian sites unrelated to the destroyed Al-Kibar reactor. Syria refused to grant further access. The case was referred to the UN Security Council, where it stalled in procedural debates. Israel's 2007 airstrike on Al-Kibar had destroyed infrastructure. The 2008 assassination of Suleiman had eliminated expertise, but neither action had changed the strategic calculus that made Syria pursue nuclear weapons in the first place. The Tartus operation was classified inside Mossad as a tactical success with limited strategic durability. The kill had been clean. The extraction had been successful. No Israeli personnel had been lost or captured. But the larger problem, Syria's nuclear ambitions remained in motion, now under Iranian oversight and beyond the reach of operations like Tartus. During his final debriefing session, Eitan was asked what he would have done differently. His answer, according to sources familiar with the debrief, was direct. I would have confirmed the target's schedule before insertion. We spent 3 days exposed because intelligence didn't know if he'd be there. The operational planners had made assumptions based on pattern analysis. Those assumptions had been probabilistic, not certain. And that uncertainty had nearly collapsed the mission multiple times before the shot was ever fired. But Eitan also acknowledged something else. Even if the planning had been perfect, even if Suleiman had appeared on schedule, even if the shot had come on the first day, the strategic outcome would have been the same. One man eliminated, one network disrupted, one program briefly interrupted, and then replacement, adaptation, continuation. The elimination of Mohammed Suleiman proved that precision operations could penetrate heavily defended Syrian territory. But it also revealed the limits of tactical action when the underlying conditions remain unchanged. Suleiman was replaced. His networks adapted. The programs he oversaw continued under different management and deeper protection. The operation succeeded in its immediate objective. It failed to solve the problem that made the objective necessary. And that gap between execution and consequence defined not just the Tartous mission, but the structural challenge of covert action in a region where every elimination creates conditions for the next threat. If you want to understand how intelligence operations shape conflicts most people never hear about, subscribe to Hidden Ops. We bring you the missions that stayed classified, the decisions made under impossible pressure, and the consequences that ripple long after the headlines fade.